why is it important for all men to get involved in the struggle against violence against women? Most men are not violent, and many men say, you know, I'm not part of the problem. I'm not violent with my family. I may be out of the box, as the other exercise that we did. You know, I'm a modern man, so I'm not part of this problem. But it is very important for all of us to really understand and analyze how even subtle ways of sexism or ways in which we might support patriarchal behavior affect the whole. So this is an exercise that I want to share that was created by Mentors of Violence Prevention. I think Jackson Katz originally created it, and I have found it very good to have a discussion about these kinds of connections between all kinds of disrespect and violence against women. So basically the exercise, again, with a live audience, you would ask first for people to give you different kinds of violence against women and maybe some examples of that. So, you know, usually people would start with hitting, for instance, right? Hitting or kicking or punching, that kind of thing. Which usually when people think violence against women, they think first physical violence, right? Then, you know, once you put some of this here, say, well, what about violence that is not physical? And then people, oh yeah, emotional violence, you know. So name calling, you know, insulting of all kinds, intimidation, and so on. And the way that this exercise works, it's a little tricky because you will see when I finish why, but there is an order in which I will put these different categories. I will try to put the more intense violence towards the top and then go to maybe less intense violence, although I do have to recognize, and of course this is very important, that survivors of violence, of course, tell us that emotional violence is not necessarily less intense than physical violence. So it's hard to categorize. However, you will see at the end of the exercise why it is important to follow a certain order. I mean, and it doesn't have to be super strict. So again, you know, you can fill more categories here, but then maybe you say, well, what about other kinds of violence? And then depending on the audience, they say, well, what else is there? So, well, what about financial abuse? Oh, financial abuse. So controlling the money in the household, you know, controlling employment, you know, those kinds of things. Of course, you know, this list could go on and on. And then if nobody has brought it up, I think sexual violence has to be brought up. Sometimes people are more uncomfortable talking about those things, but certainly it's a key component here, and certainly a key component that creates a great asymmetry between men being intimidating, for instance, and women being intimidated. So of course the first thing that comes up is rape. So I would put this up here somewhere. Again, it's hard to categorize, but I would put rape up here. And then, you know, other kinds of sexual violence can be included there. Sometimes when we talk about physical violence, it will come up, homicide will come up, and sometimes it doesn't. But I certainly will bring it up, and in some way we'll put homicide here, which would be the ultimate, you know, destruction, if you will. So once you have, you know, a decent list like that, I'd say, well, what about other ways that maybe we don't think as violence, but more as disrespect of women? How do we men disrespect women in different ways? And then, you know, things like, for instance, not listening, assuming lesser intelligence, you know, and therefore all kinds of implications, right? And I'm not saying that every man does that. Certainly that's not the case. Most men are not up here. But, you know, as you start getting lower, you will have more and more men in this category. And then as you continue, maybe some people will bring up things like, cat calls, which of course among our Latino men are pretty common. We call them piropos, but the truth is that's basically street sexual harassment, right? Sexist jokes, for instance, and so on. So those would be at the bottom. And this is where it gets interesting, because the truth is that there are a number of men that will do sexist jokes, or maybe not interrupt sexist jokes, or maybe do catcalls when they are, especially with other men, because that's what tends to happen. And usually say, well, it's only a joke. What's the big deal? It's just a thing that doesn't matter. But the interesting thing about this exercise is once you have all of this, then you draw a pyramid, okay? A pyramid, and this is where this order somewhat matters, because the most intense violence is up there, and most men, of course, do not commit homicide or rape. It's a small minority of men. And more men probably do that, and many men do these things down here. But basically, the idea, once you create a pyramid, is saying this is the base upon which the rest of this is built upon. That's why it matters that we have to interrupt sexist jokes, sexist behavior, office sexual harassment, all of that, because that creates the culture, the overall culture that basically supports other kinds of violence. So I think this is a very important concept. I remember one time doing a training among athletic trainers, coaches, athletic coaches. And these folks, when it was mandatory by and large, probably they were very happy to be there. And they had not thought about these issues. And it's not, I don't want to stereotype coaches, but we know that in athletics, the testosterone runs wild, or in the military in certain places. It doesn't mean that they are more violent, by and large. But in that training, I remember it's just like a group of guys. And I did this exercise here. And I remember when I finished the exercise, this coach, I think was a baseball coach they were high school level, said, "Oh my gosh, now I realize that when I tell my athletes, you hit like a girl," my male athletes, the young men, "you hit like a girl, the ball, I am contributing to this culture that finally is the culture that allows to rape and kill women." So in some way there was like one of those bulbs that, if any of you are trainers, we realize, wow, this is what we want, right? For someone, especially in a particular group, to tell their peers, I get it. I have connected the dots. So I have found this exercise very helpful to connect the dots between these things, and hopefully to invite all men, whether they practice this kind of behavior or whether their friends practice this kind of behavior, to interrupt the behavior and to have a way to explain why it is important to interrupt.